Welcome, everybody. Next week, on the 27th of January, Holocaust Memorial Day will remind us of one of the biggest crimes against humanity in history. 77 years ago, on the 27th of January 1945, Russian troops liberated the notorious Auschwitz concentration camp. Today, Auschwitz stands for the brutality of the Nazi regime, which swept across Europe during the Second World War. More than 6 million Jews, Sinti and Roma, political opponents, homosexuals, and many other groups who did not fit into the National Socialist stereotyping were murdered. This year, Aston University is honored to host the regional commemoration event for the Midlands. One of our history students, Dominika Basil, is the regional ambassador for the Holocaust Educational Trust. Together with our academics, she has made it possible for us to get a first-hand account from a Holocaust survivor. We are very grateful to Mrs. Dorit Oliver-Wolff for sharing her experiences with us. In 2020, she was given a British Empire Medal for services to Holocaust education and awareness. I have a very personal stake in this event. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. I have virtually no living relatives. All were killed and everything they had was stolen. I was raised on tragic stories, first from my parents and my maternal grandmother. Indeed, my mother's history is available on recordings in the Shoah Memorial Archives at USC. Then, from the community of survivors in which I grew up, there was a significant exodus of Holocaust refugees to Australia in the late 1940s and early 1950s. These stories I heard have stayed with me all my life. They're depressing, but they're also a call to understand that real evil is possible, even from the most familiar neighbors. The Holocaust Memorial Day Trust makes it clear in its mission statement that this is a day to remember not only those who were murdered under Nazi persecution, but also the many genocides which followed in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Bosnia, in Darfur, and elsewhere. Our speaker today embodies this message. Violence against minorities must be condemned wherever it happens. Just a year ago, she wrote a petition and open letter to the Prime Minister, condemning unhindered trade with China, a nation that suppresses its Uyghur Muslim minority. In hearing Mrs. Oliver-Wolff's story, we are not just listening to history. Regrettably, we are also listening to the present time. In this evening's event, we will first watch a short BBC documentary about our speaker. She will then tell us more about her experiences during and after the war, and this will be followed by a question and answer session. Thank you, Mrs. Oliver-Wolff, for being with us today.
Well, tomorrow is Holocaust Memorial Day, a time to remember the millions of Jews who died at the hands of the Nazi regime. But one pensioner from Eastbourne lived through it, and her story is dramatic. It even has a soundtrack to go with it. It's not every day a former pop star visits your school. Dorit Oliver-Wolff has come to St Paul's Catholic College in Burgess Hill to talk about her life. But her journey to get here is extraordinary.
And this was one of the songs that I sang in 1961. That was my first hit.
Her childhood was a world away from the students listening today. Hers is a remarkable tale of war, near death, glitz and glamour. Dorit was a young Jewish girl, just 5 years old and living in Hungary when the Nazi regime started to spread across Europe.
You know about the Holocaust, and I wish I wouldn't.
Originally from Yugoslavia, Dorit and her family fled Belgrade when war broke out. But they were split up, and she and her mother found themselves in Hungary.
When you were running and hiding from the Germans, where was your father? Did you ever know?
My father was taken into a forced labor camp where they were hacking stones. I don't think my father even had a duster in his hand ever before. By the time he was 30, he was worked to death.
Dorit and her mother spent the entire war in Hungary, where anti-Semitism was rife.
One day we were walking to a park. Budapest is full of beautiful parks. And then a big fat blonde woman crossed the road, looking me straight, walking towards me like that, and I was a tiny little girlie. She spat in my eyes and called me Büdös Zsidó, which means stinking Jew. And I didn't understand how you assimilate stinking Jew. Why do I have to be stinking if you are Jewish?
There was mounting hatred towards the Jewish people. Millions were sent to concentration camps, so Dorit's mother decided they would hide the fact they were Jews.
My mother refused to wear, or let us wear, the yellow Star of David because my mother suddenly reinvented herself and became a Red Cross nurse. But that was a very good disguise, if you like.
Constantly on the run and in fear of being found out, they moved from house to house. But a neighbour realised Dorit was Jewish, and one day while her mother was at work, she was caught and put into a sorting house for concentration camps. She spent over 2 months there on her own.
One lady there, I don't remember her name, at night, when I was crying because I missed my mum, she would take me into her arms, and she comforted me. And one day, they took her as well, because the soldiers used to come in and you, and they went, and they never came back. She never came back.
With the help of a guard, Dorit escaped and was reunited with her mother. They fled to another city in Hungary, Pécs, not knowing that the Nazis had captured thousands of Jews there, and they were soon arrested. While her mother was questioned, Dorit confronted her captors.
I got up, went to the desk, pointed at the photo frame. "Are these your children?" And he said, "Yes, they are my 2 daughters. They must be the same age as you are." Oh. And then I said to him, "Are you going to hurt my mummy?" He said, "Scheiße." He went around, beckoned my mother out. She said, "Come here." And she says, "Not all of us Germans are nasty swines." And this is why I try to believe that there must be a little bit of good in people. And I like to believe that not every person who sent these people to the gas chamber enjoyed it.
Having narrowly escaped death twice, Dorit's ordeal wasn't over. As a homeless refugee who'd had little food, when the war ended, 9-year-old Dorit weighed less than 3 stone. But it was singing that kept her going.
When I was afraid and I was alone, hidden somewhere, I sang. And when I was hungry, I would invent and sing songs. And all I ever wanted to do is really become a singer one day.
Oh, yes.
After the war, Dorit went on to study at the University of Munich, where she sang in jazz clubs. She was discovered by the North German Broadcasting Company and was signed to a record label. Suddenly, Germany couldn't get enough of her.
On a nice blue autumn weekend.
Many of the young German Air Force had me as a pin-up in their lockers. And everywhere was my picture. And I thought, my hand, do they know that I'm Jewish? It was a funny feeling, you know, but it was that I became their pin-up.
And as their pin-up, Dorit was invited to sing at a concert for the airmen and their families.
I I peeked through the curtains. The women had the most elegant evening dresses on, but the gentlemen had the uniforms on. I thought I'm not going to be able, because suddenly it was not an audience anymore. There were the German soldiers there. And as a finale, I said, now I'm going to choose a very special song for me, which is Havana Gila, which is a Hebrew song. They all got up and sang the song and clapped their hands. And I just had this amazing feeling of triumph. And when I sang, and I remember putting my arms up and thinking, I made it. You didn't manage to kill me. You killed all my family, but you made me a star. That was, I think, one of the most remarkable and memorable shows I ever had.
Dorit moved to England with her husband in 1962. She was convinced she would have the freedom to live the life she chose here, and also the freedom to tell her story.
It was just generally really interesting to hear about how someone can survive something like that.
She didn't have any anger about it. She more or less was more passionate about it and her experiences, and I thought she spoke really well.
Dorit's written her memoirs, and she hopes they can serve as a reminder of a chapter of history she thinks should never be forgotten.
I just feel that there are so many people that I would like to tell them, look, there am I went through this, and I have seen that. But there is life after it. Make the best of it that you can. It's not that I want to remember, believe me. I just cannot forget.
That's it.
Good. Thank you very much for the video first. And now, Dorit, if you could please give your testimonial.
Well, as you have seen, I am not the average Holocaust survivor. And at a very young age, I decided that I am going to be a survivor and not a victim. Because you have to make up in your mind which way you want to go, and hopefully you can achieve it. Because I have had so little experience with the so-called normal life, I never had a childhood. And I think I'm living it now sometimes through my children and grandchildren. But I sort of had to grow up just to survive. And I built a little cocoon for myself during those atrocities because I was afraid all the time, mostly when I was hidden, that my mum wouldn't find me. And that was terrifying because sometimes I had to sit by myself behind a cupboard or in other places whilst my mother was working so that I wouldn't be found. And I was always frightened that she will just not find me. And what then? Then they will pick me up and put me in the concentration camp. But I built a little cocoon around me in which I created a different world because I was singing. I was singing when I was hungry, and I was singing when I was afraid. And this put me into a different world because the world that I lived in was not very nice. It was full of fear. And I couldn't understand what was different. I didn't even know that I was Jewish, as you have seen. And then why would the Jewish people be hated and killed and put to concentration camps? What was different? Because I looked at other kids and other children, and they had noses and mouths and eyes and hair, and I thought that we were all the same. But obviously we were not. And that has been going on at that time. Obviously I didn't understand. And there's a wonderful word in English which says ignorance is bliss. And in this case, it was bliss because if I would have understood the severity and the gruesomeness of the situation, perhaps I would have grown up as a different person. As you have seen on the video, on my testimonial, on the documentary, that I have done loads of things, and to get there, it wasn't easy. Many challenges. I have come face to face with anti-Semitism all my life. And I used to get very, very angry about it. And to tell you the truth, you never learn how to accept it, and nobody should ever accept it. Nobody should ever accept to be bullied, spat at, killed, or dehumanized. It doesn't matter basically what color, what religion, or where do you come from. All humans have the same right for life and living. Because when I go and talk mostly to schools and students, I'm trying to point out that no baby was basically born with hate. So where and when does that hate start? Somebody has to teach them. And usually, sadly, it is the parents or the siblings. So therefore, that is where it should stop. Because hatred, greed, and anger have no boundaries. You can't say, oh, just hate them a little bit. Or you hate them or you don't. But this hatred that has been indoctrinated for thousands and thousands of years, and why is it always, well, mostly about the Jews? God says that we are chosen people. And sometimes I say, please, God, could you choose somebody else to be the chosen people and just forget about a little bit, just for a few years until we recover again? But God is not listening very much because it is all coming up again. Some people have asked me, are you religious? No, I'm not. This is a dichotomy. Part of me believes that I was saved, and part of me cannot believe because what happened. I heard a very interesting saying the other day, which I would love to share with you. Somebody said, where was God in Auschwitz? And the rabbi answered, where were humans in Auschwitz? And that is basically the question forever and ever. I find that humanity, unfortunately, doesn't learn. I find for some reason that, I suppose it's greed, because people are afraid to have less. But we all have got enough, even more. I mean, I could live with a quarter of what I have, and if when I can, I give it away as well, because others need it more. But it is just that constant looking over your shoulder. And if somebody, you always, when you meet people, when I have met quite a few people who are Holocaust survivors, and you hear their stories. And I think we are somehow all slightly damaged. People say, well, get over it. You don't ever get over it. You try to live with it and make the best out of it. And it is like a tapestry. Your life is like a tapestry. And it has been woven into it. And then sometimes there are beautiful colors woven into it, but some of the past is part of it. You are not what you are now without having had the past. And I'm very passionate about equality, about human rights, that everybody should respect other people's life. When the war started, I was only 5 years old. Up till then, I had a very cushy life because as a very young girl, at the age of 4.5, I was dancing in front of King Peter of Yugoslavia. My mother was a ballet teacher in the court in Yugoslavia. So I was a little show off. I already learned how to dance. And I think that that is where I sort of decided I want to be a singer and a dancer one day. We were bombed out at the age of 5. We had to escape from a burning house in our pajamas to the nearest forest where the partisans were. And from there, we went to Hungary because my mother and my grandmother originally came from Budapest. And for the first 6 months, or a year or so, it was quite okay, Yugoslavia, in Hungary, because my mom was teaching. And then suddenly it started, as you heard the story. I was walking in the park and this woman spat at me, called me Budo Žido. And I just didn't understand, because I didn't even know that we were Jewish, because we were not religious at home. And in Yugoslavia, you were mixed between Orthodox Catholics, between Jews, between Muslims. People were not talking about religion because it was not so paramount. But then later on, I found out that it's a terrible thing to be Jewish, because you must be afraid and other people have got the right to kill you. All my family was killed, except my mother, my grandmother, and then my uncle, who was in a concentration camp in Poland, but he escaped. And then after the war, as I said, we were starved. We didn't have any food. And because we didn't have any coupons, my grandmother and I used to go in the evening to scavenge out of dustbins for food. We only took vegetables because meat used to be smelly. And so by the time that I was 9 years old, I only weighed 3.5 stone. I had pneumonia, pleurisy, and I had no hair. I lost all my hair, and I couldn't stand because I was too weak. Because we spent 9 months in a derelict cellar without electricity. And the food that we had at night, my mom and some other people who were in the cellar used to go out and raid some of the shops that were bombed. So after the war, we were liberated by the Russian soldiers. And then we went back to Yugoslavia, because my grandfather was a solicitor and a county judge, and we had a big family. And we went back because we thought we could get somehow reunited. But we found out that they were all killed, everybody. I was the only survivor. My maiden name was Handler, and my grandfather was Dr. Handler, Zygmunt Handler. And when you think that there are people who have got uncles and aunts and God knows what, and then I was the only survivor, it is somehow, you somehow feel like a multiple orphan. And then when I started school, the local children spat at me and threw stones at me, and because I was so skinny and I had no hair, so my grandmother had to crochet one of those funny little hats for me, and I used to get beaten up, so I decided not to go to school anymore. And eventually somebody discovered that I could sing, and I got a state scholarship to a music academy in Montenegro. And that's where I spent 3 years, and that's where I learned how to read and write and play the piano. And then we went to Israel. And it was the most wonderful moment of my life, and I couldn't understand it, that everybody was Jewish. I remember going with a bus, driving in a bus, and I tapped the driver there and I said, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" And he looked at me in Hebrew. He said, "No, what do you think? Of course, everybody's Jewish." But I couldn't understand it. I mean, they were road sweepers and they were Jewish. Not every Jew was a professor or a doctor. But for where I came from, everybody who was Jewish, they were bankers or teachers or professors. And no wonder everybody hated us. But anyway, but then you found people in Israel, and they were working on a farm. They were milking cows. And I thought this was absolutely wonderful, wonderful. And But my mother left Israel after a while, which I regretted all my life. And I didn't have a passport, I was stateless. And the biggest disappointment in my life, my mother married a German prisoner of war. And you can imagine I was about 10 and a half when I met him. And we refused to speak German or anything at home because to us, German people and the Hungarian people, they were murdering the Jews. But later on I found out that that is not so. It is the individual and not the whole German nation and not the whole Hungarian nation. And I remember sitting at the dinner table and Werner would eat with us and I would stare at him like this. And my mother would say, darling, that is very impolite. He didn't do anything to you. And he's a really nice man. Get to know him. And I said, well, I'm not staring at him. I'm murdering him. I'm trying to kill him. So she said, what do you mean you're trying to kill him? How? I said, if you look at him and you think, die, 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 eventually he has to die. And 3 years later, he didn't die. But I got fed up and I said, oh, well, let me hate somebody else instead. But it worked out that Werner was a really wonderful man. He was patient and very, very loving. And eventually I went to Augsburg where his parents were because I became stateless. And I had an amazing time. And they looked after me as if I was their own child. Having known my past, they were doubly as lovely. But in the meantime, from Israel, my mother went to Turkey and I went to a Turkish school. And I was just in the middle of doing my O-levels when they threw me out of Turkey because I was stateless. So I went to my grandparents to Augsburg, but I had to go back eventually because I wanted to finish my A-levels. But the only way that you could go back to get out to anywhere abroad without a passport was if you had an Artistenvisa, an artist visa. And there was a newspaper ad in the paper that you were looking for ballet dancers for the Istanbul theater. And I applied for it. I was 16 then. And I got the job as a dancer. And at the station, I met 11, there were 12 of us. And I met 11 German girls between 17 and 18. Now the German girls are very, very well built. And they have got really quite big boobs. And I stood there and they looked at me because I was the runt of the litter. They just stared at me and they said to me, what are you doing here? Well, I didn't get into this. We traveled on the Orient Express. We arrived to Istanbul and we had our first rehearsals in leotards. And the 11 big-bosomed young ladies looked at me and they said, we ask you the same question. What the hell are you doing here? I said, well, I'm a ballet dancer. He said, you are what? Did you not read what you signed for? I said, yes, ballet dancer. No, darling, she said, you signed up for a belly dancer. Well, I was so excited, I didn't even notice it. And then they looked at me and said, you have no tits, you have no belly, you have no bum. What are you going to give the public? They come here to see your tits jumping up and down and your belly. And I started to cry. And I said, well, I can't grow it overnight, can I? So they were absolutely wonderful. One of them lent me her bra and filled it out with cotton wool and whatever. And they made me up and put me false eyelashes on. And they dressed me up to somebody. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't know who it was. But they were wonderful to me. They really adopted me. And anyway, I became a belly dancer, but I didn't wiggle my own boobs because if I wiggled it too high, the cotton wool would have flown over and that would be the comedy act. And this is how I had a double life. Because in the morning, during the day until 4 o'clock, I was back in the convent school doing my A-levels. And between 8 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning, I was this femme fatale in false eyelashes, false bosoms, fishnet tights, and marabou feathers in my tush. So I had this double life, and I found it very difficult because I didn't fit in with the 16-year-old girls, but I had to do my A-levels. And I didn't quite fit in with all these women there who had a past. I didn't know what they were talking about. And eventually I sneaked one day onto the stage and started to sing because there was nobody there. And then suddenly this man appeared clapping, and I said, this is the end of the flat-chested belly dancer. I will be kicked out because I just used the microphone without asking. And I said, no, don't stop. He says, you have got an amazing voice. Oh, I said, thank you. He said, would you like to have a spot every evening after the first act as a singer? I said, but I only know 2 songs. He says, don't worry, you have to start learning. Anyway, he put my name into the program, and he says, what shall I call you? Who are you? What would you like to be known as? Well, I didn't have a stage name then. I said, just call me Dorit the Voice. And from there on, I started my singing career. And when I finished with this touring, I had to tour the Middle East in nightclubs, singing and dancing because I needed a passport, and I was stateless. So eventually I got married for a passport, but it was a marriage just on paper. And then eventually I had to choose where I'm going to go to university. And I was a linguist already then. So I decided I would like to go to Germany because I would like to learn more about the people, because it was a German officer who saved our lives when we were questioned, and he was an inquisitor, and he laid his career on the line to save my mother and me. And then I saw, well, you see, and my mother always pointed it out, you cannot judge a lot of bad people because there must be some good people amongst them. So I wanted to go to Germany to really learn about the very people who killed my family. And I was really almost angry and disappointed with myself because I really found the German people very nice, very cultured, very musical. And I felt very welcome. And this is where I started, and they discovered me as a singer. And as I said, they made me into a star. They appreciated my voice. And mind you, I did come across very often that on the university, the younger generation asked me, I'm sorry, but it wasn't me, it was our parents. You cannot be angry with somebody's children or grandchildren because the parents did something wrong. But I did learn, and I still kept it with me, that you cannot be angry with a nation. You can be angry with an individual. And later on, as I say, I worked all over Europe. Then I came to England. I married an Englishman, a very quiet Englishman, and he was my soulmate, my best friend. And here I am. I didn't talk about the Holocaust much because it is not something that I liked people to know, but yet it was all the time. It was with me. All you have to do is smell or something to remember. I remember I could never step on the street on food or bread. I couldn't throw any food into the bin. And the little quirky things that you can't do. I mean, the first time that we had our own home, my God, but I was still afraid. I never said that I was Jewish, but I was Jewish for me, but I was still afraid that maybe my neighbors wouldn't like me. They wouldn't like my children because we are Jewish. So I didn't hide that I was Jewish, but I didn't advertise it. Hooray, here I am, the little Jew from Yugoslavia. But if somebody would sort of be anti-Semitic, I would get very, very upset about it. Anyway, I never went back to Hungary because I don't know whether it is known to you that the Hungarians were more anti-Semitic than any other nation. For some reason, they killed more Jews than the Germans did. And as a surprise, my granddaughter and my daughter bought me a ticket to visit Hungary. It was in 1914, I think. And I went to Hungary and I took a taxi and I went back to the derelict cellar where I was 9 months there. And in the meantime, the house was rebuilt, so the derelict cellar was not derelict anymore. And the young couple came out and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I used to live here, spend 9 months in this cellar." So the chap said, "Would you like to see it? I have the keys." And I froze. My legs stopped and I said, I was grown into the floor and I couldn't speak and I broke out in cold sweat. And when I could talk and move, then I ran away into the taxi and back we went to the hotel. And when I came home, within 6 months, I wrote my memoirs. And I was so surprised that I have remembered things so clearly as if it was yesterday. The memories didn't leave me. It was very painful, but I just had to write it. Because it is not a sad story. It is a story, a success story, a story for survival. It's called From Yellow Star to Pop Star. And if you have a dream, you have to go for it. And I wanted to be a singer against all odds. And when the doctor in the cellar told my mom she has only 6 months to live, I said, "Oh, no, it's not possible. How can I become famous in 6 months?" So you see, I beat death quite a few times. I hope I can beat it again for a few years because I'm busy doing talks and speaking to people. And I feel very privileged that I am able to speak and share my experiences with all of you, because I strongly believe that we are all the similar and we are all the same, really. And we have just to learn about each other. That was me at 2 years old with my mum before the war. Yeah. Good God. Oh, that was me when I was at 5th birthday. This is where I was already stage struck, you see. And this is about 4 months later, the war broke out. This is when I was first time picked up by the Gestapo and put in a sorting center where I've spent 3 months without my mother. And that is the yellow star, Jude. That's a Magendovit that everybody had to wear. And those who wore it, everybody was allowed to spit at them. And those who didn't wear it and should, they have been deported. And this is something that my mother refused to wear. That was my mother. That is where she dressed up as a Red Cross nurse. And this is how she survived the war. She dressed up as a Red Cross nurse, and we had to mingle. We had to spend lots of time in railway station, bus stations, and I was her little patient. I had a bandage around my face, and if she wanted to make it authentic, she would cut a little finger and put blood around the bandage that I had, and we would walk the streets. And if we stopped, she would say, "I'm taking this little girl to the hospital because she had a shrapnel. She was just injured by a bomb." So, yeah, and this was me when I escaped, when I was freed from the pre-concentration camp. Here I was about 6.5, maybe 7. Yeah, and that was me in Turkey. That was my double life. This was me during the day. during the day. And that was me as that little one on the very left-hand side. That was me as a ballet dancer. So this was my double life. And if you see on that picture again, not the girl who's got her arm up, my hair grew then, and that was me as the belly dancer. So this was my double life, you see, and the middle and this too. So you see, I was a mixed up kid. That was my first record. I didn't like it very much, but a record is a record. So it's called Spanische Romanze. And then I made films. Here I had a double act. I was a Hungarian Csárdas singer dancer, and then I was a musician. And you see, I had a mustache. And in those days, they didn't have this very posh glue. And when they took the glue, my mustache off, I had to go to the hospital because they removed all my top lip. And this was my hit in Germany, which is called Oh Yes, Das ist Musik. And believe it or not, they're still playing it. And if you're lucky, you can hear it. And that was me when I look in the mirror now and I said, my God, who is that old bag looking at me? Because that's how I used to look. And now I'm each time surprised and say, who is that looking at me? Is that you? But it's still me inside. Few more wrinkles, but it's still me. And this is basically the book From Yellow Star to Pop Star, and that's my story. And now you can ask me all the questions that you want, and I'm very happy to talk to you. Well, Stefan, was denkst du?
Very good. Thank you so much, Dorit. This was a very moving account, and I think I speak on behalf of the audience that this was not just interesting, but really very, very moving. We've all read and heard about the horrors of the Holocaust, but to listen to someone who has actually survived it really makes it very concrete for all of us. It reminds us that we all have a duty to remember, and this event hopefully serves this purpose to remember. If anyone wants to find out a little bit more about Dorit's life, you can buy a copy of her book, From Yellow Star to Pop Star, how a young girl survived the Holocaust and became a singing sensation. And you can even buy a signed copy. If you want to do that, get in touch with me, write me a short email, and I'll arrange this. Now, thank you, Dorit, but also thanks everyone in the audience for attending. When you registered for the event, you will have probably recognized the structure on the left-hand side of that photo. That's the Holocaust Memorial, the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, which opened in 2005, right in the middle of Berlin. And this picture and that image really sets the tone for today's event, which is very international. We have students from 4 different countries in the audience, from Germany, from Austria, the United States, and the UK. So could you show the next slide, please? Yeah, that's great, thanks. The students from these countries and from 4 different universities have actually come together and are currently collaborating on a very interesting project, a joint project, which is connected to the Arolsen Archive in Germany. Now, the Arolsen Archive is the world's most comprehensive archive on the victims and survivors of National Socialism. It holds information on more than 17 million people. In the project, Every Name Counts, I just made a screenshot here, students from different countries piece together information on victims to build a digital memory of persecution. This project doesn't necessarily follow official remembrance rituals. These very often don't mean very much to young people. Instead, this project engages young people digitally, encouraging participation in various different and more fluid ways. If anyone wants to know a little bit more about the project and might even want to participate, again, do drop me a short email. It's a really worthwhile and important international project. I'll get you in touch with the organizers. And the spirit of that project is very much in line with the testimonial we heard from Dorit, to speak to the young generation, to preserve the memory of persecution, and to do this in an international rather than just national context. A very important organization in this regard is, of course, the Holocaust Educational Trust. And we're very grateful for their support in facilitating this event tonight. And could I just ask Dominika whether she is on screen? Dominika, are you somewhere? Yes, fantastic. Thanks very much. So Dominika is a history student at Aston, and we cooperated on organizing the event, and she was in touch with Dorit as well in preparation for this event. And Dominika can say a few words about the Holocaust Educational Trust, and then she also will kick off the question and answers. We've got a few questions from the audience. Could I just say, if anyone in the audience at the moment has a question, please post that in the comments, and I'll coordinate question. I can't promise that each question will be asked, but I'll make an effort to ask as many as possible. So over to Dominika and question and answer.
Yes, thank you, Dorit, so much for sharing your story and for being in touch and coming and speaking for us. So as a regional ambassador, I was able to get in touch with Dorit and help to organize this event with Aston. And our goal is just to get young people to help to understand the contemporary relevance of the Holocaust on the modern society, and for us to remember it and how important it is to remember, understand it, and pass it on, which links very well to the Aston Archives project as well. So yes, and I have a question for Dorit as a regional ambassador. I just wanted to ask you, Dorit, what motivates you to work with the Holocaust Educational Trust so closely and pass on your story?
Because it has to be explained, because so many people read things, but it is not always, everybody reads out of things what they feel that they would like to. I feel that I am obliged. It is important to teach and to tell them the true story, how it really was, because there are still some people who deny it and don't believe it. And I would like to be able to, I feel very privileged that I have been asked and invited and re-invited. People have to understand that hating brings to killing, and killing is wrong. And to be afraid of breathing or to show your face because you're afraid, it's important to share it with people, to tell them it is wrong. People have to learn that if they want to have a future or a better future, then they have to learn from the mistakes that our parents or their parents or the people have done in the past. And so I would like to be able to speak to as many people as possible. I mean, if they invite me to Australia or to Canada or to wherever, I would love to go. And I'd like to go to Germany as well. But I find it is so to share, because only through example and through learning, hopefully, people will try to be better people. Is that answered?
Yeah, definitely.
I could elaborate on it, but we don't have enough time. And Dominic, I thank you very, very much for contacting me, because it's such a privilege to be able to be still alive and be able to share it. And I only hope that I have got a bit longer and I can visit many more people and talk to them.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for you being an ambassador. The ambassadors are doing a wonderful job. And I thank you very much. And on behalf of all those people who are no more, you are just helping them, the memory, their voice. And I can speak for many of them. Unfortunately, when you switch me on, I hope that I do justice to many of them who are dead, and I can speak for them. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks also from us, Dominika, for doing this, and it shows that everybody can actually make a difference and put themselves forward to doing this. Dorit, you might not read all the comments. I'll just read one comment to make you aware how much of a difference you make. There's one colleague who wrote, "Very moving, Dorit, as you were talking. I have your talk in my ears as I hold my toddler son. I'm holding him very tight. Wonderful story by a wonderful storyteller." So you certainly do make a difference.
Thank you very much. Very kind.
So you just said we don't have much time, but I'm afraid we do still have a bit of time. And I'd now like to read a few questions which we got before the event. And these are from international students. I don't know in each case who the student is, which country. So it might either be America or Germany or Austria or the UK. And these questions, first there are a couple of questions about the time during the war when you experienced all this. If I could take us back to that a little bit. So the first question from Ian. Did you think you would manage to survive captivity, or did you really think you would die?
I never thought I would die. Surviving was not a question. You have to survive. That is the whole point of living. And if there is hope, if there is no hope, there is no life. You always have to believe in something positive. And even when I couldn't move and I was bombed and I was under the rebel, I never thought that would be the end. I always thought that, as they say, it's very cheesy, the end of the tunnel, if you like. No, you have to have hope and you have to believe in yourself. And when your time comes, your time comes. But I never thought about dying. Now that I'm this older, I keep on thinking, oh gosh, I don't really want to kick the bucket yet because I haven't spoken to so many people yet. But no, death is not a choice. It is not a, no. I survive and I will survive.
Yeah, there's another question. I think listeners are really interested in the kind of resilience that builds up in that situation. So how does one actually survive in that situation? There's another question from Gabi. How did you survive? Just by taking each hour, day as it came and not worrying about anything else? So what were your concrete thoughts as you were...
My thoughts were, first of all, I was very hungry all the time. And I was very afraid. And my mother was like my grandmother. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and all that. And incidentally, my grandmother had a beautiful voice and she was wanting to be an opera singer. But coming from a very strict Jewish family, only prostitutes go on stage. Well, I must have been on prostitute because I was on stage all my life, but she was beautifully singing. So I was growing up with all the arias from the operas. And we didn't have television or radio, but she would sing to me. And you don't look at you just one day, and when the next day comes, you're happy that, oh, it's another day. Time stops somehow. And that is good, because in my age, you see, ignorance is bliss. I didn't really realize what was happening, except the fear. The fear was so much embedded in me. But no. Life is for living.
Yeah. So was it to some extent your creativity or the musicality, memories you had already?
As I said, I built a little cocoon around me. And in that little cocoon, I invented some fairy tales, and I was drawing a lot. And as I said, everything that I have seen, for me, that was a dance or a song, or everything became a visual art in a way. And then I tried to cut away things that I was afraid of. And then I created something beautiful. I had a vivid imagination.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I said, if anyone's got an additional question to what Dorit is just just telling us, please do put it.
Don't worry, you cannot insult me. You can ask. I'm here now, and otherwise you have to travel all the way to Eastbourne to ask me.
As Dorit told me in a phone conversation on Saturday, anything goes. So please go ahead.
Yeah.
But there's another question from Owen, who asks, how was the Holocaust viewed by the citizens and soldiers of Germany at the time? You probably from your personal memory, is there anything
people didn't like to? When I was in Germany, people didn't like to talk about it, and I was in my circle where I was on the university. People didn't talk about it, so I didn't have any kind of a experience in that, because people avoided it with me. And very many of the students from the uni, they were always apologetic to me and embarrassed about it. And I rather wouldn't talk about it, because I wouldn't want to be singled out, positive or negative. I just wanted to be, I didn't like, as I said, the chosen people. When they speak about the Jewish people, the chosen people, I sometimes say, please, could you choose somebody else for a change and just leave the poor Jews alone? Choose somebody else and let them be the chosen people. But if this is the price to pay for the chosen people, the price is too high.
Yeah.
No, I never had experience in this. Sorry, Owen, darling. I never had the experience to speak to any of the, although I was a pin-up, they made me a pin-up, but they didn't talk about it. Go on, question. Surely you have got a question.
You've just moved a little bit into the post-war years, but there's one interesting, I think, one from Joanne, which takes us again back to the war years. Now, you told us about some unpleasant, or in that documentary, some unpleasant experiences. But did you experience any kindness or assistance from Germans or non-Jews during the war?
Yes, I did during the war. As I said, when my mother was captured and me, and there was this very, very high officer who was actually the inquisitor. And my mother was picked up and put into this room. There was a chair there and a lamp, and I had to wait outside, and the door was ajar. And I have never seen my mother in my life so afraid. And the inquisitor had really, he was I don't know the age, I can never judge in that age, but he had lots of medals on, but he never looked at me or my mother or anybody as we came in through the room. My mother was marched in with 3 Gestapo soldiers, and straight away she had to sit on the chair, and this man kept on writing, and I went up to this big desk. I don't know what possessed me, and there was a little frame of 2 children there on the picture. And I said, excuse me, I said, who are these pictures of? Then he looked at me, and I saw these most beautiful blue eyes looking me straight in my soul. Oh, he said, they are my little daughters, they're twins. They must be same age as you. So he started the conversation. So I said, why is my mommy sitting on that chair in that room? I said, please don't hurt my mommy. I don't have anybody else in the world. She's the only person, and she didn't do anything wrong. Why did you bring her here? I don't think she likes to be here because she looks so afraid. I said, please don't hurt her. He got up and beckoned her out. My mom, he beckoned her out. He did like this to my hair. He stood up. Now, don't be shocked. Stefan, don't be shocked. He put his 2 hands on the table and he said, Scheiße, I can't do this anymore. He said, not all of us German enjoy what we are doing, he says. I can't do this anymore. And he took all this money out of his wallet, gave it to my mother, and said to her, your little daughter is your saving angel. And he marched us down through this corridor in front of the Kaserne. How do you say Kaserne in English?
The barracks.
Into the barracks. And everybody, as we walked through he must have been a very high-ranking officer, because everybody who passed him was doing the Heil Hitler sign and clicked. And so he must have been a very high, but whoever he was. And he took us outside the barracks and said to my mother, opposite is the railway station. Take the first train, don't ask any questions, don't look back, just go, and God bless you. And just think, don't think that all Nazis, all Germans are Schweinehunde. Don't think that. We have to do certain things that we don't agree with everything. And he parted, who knows what they did to him, but he saved my mum's and my life. And and this is one of the reasons when I met him later on, and then I met Werner, my mum's husband, that I said, I want to meet the German people. Because if there was one guy there who had the guts to do this and to free my mother and me, at that time, of course, I was too little to think about consequences. But later on, I thought, good God, what happened to that man? Was he killed? Did he survive? Did he remember us? And when I went to Germany, I mean, my stepfather's parents, they were absolutely fantastic to me. They took me up as if I would be their own child. My grandfather, my step-grandfather, he was a very famous oboe player in Augsburg. And he played with a symphony orchestra. And when the Nazis kicked out everybody from the orchestra, they came in one day at a rehearsal and they said, every Jew has to get up because you can't be in a symphony orchestra, German symphony, as a Jew. And my grandfather, he got up and walked out with them. And they said, Herr Albers, you are not a Jew. He says, they are my friends and colleagues. If they can't work. And so they put him away, I don't know for how many months as well. So you see, it is just not everybody is. And you have to understand that. This is why I want to share my experiences, that there is good in everybody. There is bad in people as well, but try to be good and try to understand other people and have empathy, because nobody is better than somebody else. You are not better, I am not better. Those poor people in China, the Uyghurs, they are being treated just like we used to be in the concentration camps. And that is horrible. And I'm standing up for them as well, because that is wrong. And I can't, as a person who has been in a concentration camp, I cannot stand by and don't say and be counted. And people, you see, not the person who is taking the gun is the one who is murdering you, but all those people around who are standing and say nothing. They're just equally as guilty. So you have to stand up for right, no matter how old you are, no matter what color, no matter what religion you are. You have to stand up for what is right. Your turn.
Thank you, Dorit. Yeah, it's I find it, as a German myself, as you know, I find this very moving to listen to, and I think many of in the audience think the same. It's very impressive that you take on that global view, that you do care about the Uyghurs. One of my research areas is South African history, and I'm always astounded how many Jews were actually involved in the anti-apartheid struggle and were imprisoned and went into exile, mostly to London. So it's really a global story. Once people have experienced that kind of persecution, they do know what it means, and that it is a global issue that's not just about Jews or Germans or other groups. It's a global issue. So it's really wonderful to listen to you and communicate that message as somebody who's actually witnessed all this. There are now a couple of questions about your time after the war. There's Laura, who is a student from Paderborn University, who asks one question: what persuaded you to return to Germany after World War II? Were you not put off by all your experience?
No, au contraire. It made me interesting, because I wanted to learn what kind of people could do that. Because you have got music, you have got culture, you have got, your cooking is bloody marvelous. You are very Wohnkultur, And basically the average German person is cultured, because, I mean, you have got all those composers, and it made me curious. How could people with so much knowledge and education still have so much hate and be capable of murdering people for no reason and follow somebody? Hitler alone couldn't do what he did. He had to have followers. He had a gift of the gab, and he was a wonderful orator, but he was not an intelligent man. He was not an intellectual. He was not educated. He didn't even know how to hold a knife and fork properly. And yet people were influenced, they were sort of mesmerized. And of course the politic and the other people, he was a puppet, you know, and he was a very useful puppet, and people used him. And then of course they needed the money, and the Jews had money, so they borrowed the money, because they accused the Jews that it was because of the Jews that Germany didn't have any money. And when the time would come to give the money back to the Jews, it's easier to kill people than have to give them back the money. You find it today. Your best friend says, look, give me £50, I need something. Of course you lend him £50. And suddenly, in the first 2 weeks, he's very nice to you, and thank you, it's so nice of you, nobody else gave me the £50. And then it's 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, and 6 months later, he doesn't even want to talk to me, because he's upset with me, because he doesn't want to give me the money back. But I would be much happier that he would say, look, I don't have the money, but please can we stay friends? Not cut the and this is what happened in Germany. And in many other countries, like in the Ottoman Empire, he invited Ataturk, invited the Jews, because Jews had the money and they helped him a lot. But all I'm saying is, it is like a snowball. It ricochets. One thing is another. Yes, I went to Germany because I just wanted to know. And as I said, I went there because I was angry. I went there because I wanted to shout at people. And I wanted to tell them, how dare you? Who are you to kill my family? And then I started to feel guilty, because I fell in love with a German student, and he was wonderful. And I thought, my God, how could I fall in love with a Nazi? And apparently his parents were Nazis, but I didn't know that. And he was absolutely wonderful. And I was invited to them for lunch, and he wanted to marry me. But his father was the director of BMW during the war. He was a big Nazi, and his mom was one of the female, I don't know what they call them. She was also in the party and a big Nazi. And then I thought, I am so much in love with this boy, but I couldn't possibly have the grandchildren of Nazis. But not everybody was Nazi. And I loved Germany, and the German people were absolutely lovely to me. And I was very grateful that I did go. And I realized that not all Germans are bad. They're not all good, but they're human just like everybody else.
Yeah, there's
It taught me a lesson, and that's why I went to Germany.
There's a question that's related to that, actually, from Taiba, who is an Aston student. You mentioned earlier that your fellow students at Munich tended to avoid the topic of you being Jewish, probably because they didn't want any complicated conversations around this. But did you encounter any prejudices after the war? Possibly having to do with you being a singer, or generally in everyday life?
Well, people were sort of talking behind my back, and they would sort of try to see whether I'm Jewish, and I'm not Jewish. I didn't deny it, but I didn't advertise it. I just wanted to be liked. You see, even today, I want to be liked because who I am, not what I am. If you don't like me, it's your loss, because I'm really quite lovely. But don't like me or dislike me because I'm Jewish, or I'm Christian, or I am whatever. get to know me, give me the politeness to get to know me, and then you can make up your mind. But you find prejudice everywhere. I found prejudice here in England as well. But this is just human nature. And that's what I would just like to change some people's minds, not to get to know people, because like schools, there are some terrible fights in classes between the young people. And I try to tell them that get to know that person that you dislike, learn about them, learn about what they believe in, their family life, and you will find out that you have got much more in common than not. And very often I was successful. I like to say that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. There was there were a few questions about the post-war years, and there were some general questions as well, kind of big questions. Some of those you've already referred to, but I'd like to pick one question from the audience, from Anna M. Do you feel that Germany and Europe are still grieving in a way? Do you think that this affects the strong passion many young Germans have towards human rights nowadays?
Very many of the young Germans, obviously they feel ashamed, and they feel, because they still cannot understand why the parents did what or the grandfather. I mean, it is family. And then the extended family is the nation. And people, if I would do something wrong, my children would feel ashamed for me and would say, look what my mom did. They cannot change it, but they will try to sort of compensate for it. And I strongly believe that many of the children and grandchildren feel bad about it, what has happened. And the only way that they can try to make it good is to fight and try to make it better. Is that the right answer?
Well, I don't think there's any right or wrong, but
exactly.
It's certainly...
But this is how I can only say how I believe. You know, it is very... because you have to live with your own conscience. And you cannot necessarily take on your father's bad doings. But what you can do is you try to make it better by your own behavior, by your own example, by your own action.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just saw that Anna is actually from the United States, Kennesaw State University, so it shows how global the message is you're conveying.
Not in the States, is she?
In the United States, in Georgia.
Whereabouts? Oh, I have my cousin in Miami, Florida. And I was there a few years ago, and I love it. Oh, the Americans have got so much more joie de vivre than we have it here. Oh, I like all these things.
That would be another interesting conversation. Going back to some of the questions in the chat, there's one from Priscilla. Is there any book or film that has helped you to process what happened to you, or you think captured what happened well? Any film or book that speaks to you?
Yeah, many of the films have got... I have seen, of course, I have seen Schindler's List, and I have seen The Pianist, and there are many, many films. But everybody's story is different. And I have seen... They also made a documentary about me, which was saying Auschwitz told. And there were many people's stories there, about 10 different other people. And everybody's is different, and everybody has got different experiences. And it also leaves on every individual a different stigma. You sometimes think, well, I'm over it, it happened then, here I am now. And but everybody, I think all the people who have been through the Holocaust are slightly damaged people. We are all a little bit damaged. Well, actually, my book should be a wonderful film because that shows a little bit of drama and it shows show business. Yes, find me somebody who is going to make a film out of it, and I come and play my part. No, it is very difficult, because I sometimes think, am I too dramatic? Because there are sometimes that I get very, very ill and very upset. And I don't like to pick on, because if you have a scab, you let it heal. But you don't let it heal because you always scratch a little bit on it. You don't even notice it. So it starts to bleed again. And then you have to wait until it scabs back again. But everybody who has gone through such trauma, it's impossible to completely forget it. Well, please tell me how you do it, and I go on a course. I love to. I can't. But perhaps that gives me more empathy and understanding. And that's what I would like to do. I would like to understand a bit more.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're passing that on for us to help understand and develop that.
I have been to some of the schools where I met a Jewish person before. And then they looked at me. I said, why me like that? Is there anything? If I was a man, I would have asked, is my fly open? But I couldn't ask that. But that child looked at me from bottom to top and really stared at me. I said, darling, is there anything wrong? No, he says, Miss, I have just never seen a Jew before. So what did you think, that we have horns, or we have got trunks, or we have got a hunchback? How did you think a Jew looks like? He says, I don't know. I just never saw a Jew. And that was here in one of the little villages in Sussex. So I'm just trying to tell you, and that's what's, because we are just like anybody else. And that's what I try to sort of explain, that we are all like somebody else. And somebody else is all like we are. We are a melting pot. We should look after each other, because the way the things go, soon we are going to be a figment of people's imagination. Sorry, your turn. I get carried away, as you see.
Our turn. Yeah, there's another question from Priscilla. You said anything goes, Dorit, so here's possibly a tricky one. In light of what you said about supporting human rights, what role do you see Holocaust survivors playing in the current political situation in Israel with Palestine?
Well, this whole situation between Israel and Palestine is completely unfair, dishonest, and manipulative. I have been in Israel. I have met lots of Palestinian people, and history has been rewritten. I'm not being biased, but I know for a fact that Israeli people, Israeli soldiers, would never, ever torture or beat up an Arab child or any child. Not so long ago, from somebody who is very anti-Semitic, sent me a video where soldiers were holding up a 2-year-old child and beating it. And you see, this is what the bloody Israelis are doing to a Palestinian child. He sent me a video. And I turned this video on really loud, and it was not a Hebrew, that was Arab language, Arabic, and it was an Arabic, and it was all staged, but it was not Hebrew. So the average person who looks at it, and you put a caption, the Israeli soldiers is beating up a Palestinian child, they see it for themselves, but they don't know the language difference. So all I'm trying to say, propaganda. And for lately, Israel had a lot of bad propaganda, and lots of the land that was assumed to say that the Jews stole from Palestine. About 10 years ago, there was in Times about 3 pages showing that the Israelis bought the land from the Palestinians for cash. And a few years later, they said that they stole it. Those two people are both completely idiotic, because they have got so much natural minerals, everything, the weather. If they would become friends and help each other, that part of the world would become the most ideal. It would be proper paradise. But it is some bigger countries, it's not their interest. But if one day they would just wake up and see that we are brothers, we live next to each other. If you see the example, there is no difference between you take a young Israeli young man's pants off and you take a Muslim Palestinian boy's pants off, and they look at each other. They are both circumcised. There is no difference. So why, if they put their clothes on, they straight away have the flick knife and they want to kill each other? I don't suggest they should walk around naked, but it should remind them that they are basically same. Does it make any sense what I'm saying? And I do not understand why they have got such, naturally they should understand each other. And there are lots of Palestinians who live in Israel and they're quite happy. But if you are in a country or in a nation that gives you fatwa and empowers you that your wish is to put all the Jews into the sea, it's very sick. It's very sick and it's wrong. And why, if there is a big, one of the Palestinian big muftis is very, very ill and is dying, why do they send them to Tel Aviv to the hospital so the bloody Jews could save him? It's discrepancy. It's absolutely a wrong propaganda. And they should have both their heads put together, listen to me, and they should make peace. Next.
Yeah, good. We'll move from, I knew that was a tricky one, and we probably best let the audience
decide. We can
Decide.
repeat this one day again to do another conversation as well.
Exactly, yeah. But here's
Stefan.
another interesting one, moving from Israel to Britain now, and a question from my colleague Ilaria Scalia from the History Department. Do you see anti-Semitism in Britain today?
Yes. Yes. I used to have a ladies' fashion shop, my husband opened the fashion shop because he said it's too expensive to buy my good taste. So when I bought it wholesale, 2 for the customers and 1 for me. So I had a very nice ladies' boutique shop. And I had a woman one day coming in and shouting at me. She says, "Go back to where you came from, you bloody Jew." So I picked her up by the scruff of her neck. I was 30 years younger. And I kicked her out of the shop. But it was nice because I could. Many years before when it was, I couldn't have done it because I would have been put in jail. Yes, people, not many people, but it is becoming stronger and stronger, the anti-Semitism in Britain as well. And there are some Jews who have been here over 300 years. So how can we tell them go home? This is their home. And it shouldn't be anti-Semitism. It should be any anything shouldn't be, because Britain is very multicultural. And the British people on one side are very, very tolerant. And they are, and also they are not as nosy as they are in some other countries. So they respect the next door neighbor. And which is wonderful. If you lived in other countries, before you moved in, they would come in and look what kind of wallpaper you have on. And it's not nice, but I like living here. I came to England because I admired the ethos, I admired the schooling, and I admired that my house is my home, is my castle, and that people do respect each other's. I like that very much. And it is again propaganda about anti-Semitism. It is catching like measles. But now, of course, it's COVID, it's catching. But even COVID is not that catching. But don't start me on that one.
I won't. I think we've got time for one more question, a concluding one. And this is actually from a student. I think it's a student, Joe. And it's possibly a bit of a big one. You have referred to this a little bit in your talk, but just looking into the future, what is your message to future generations?
If we or they, I'm already the past, not to make the same mistakes what the parents and grandparents made. not to be prejudiced, and to understand that as a race, it doesn't matter what color we are, what religion we are. If there is a God, and if there is one God, the different religions should be that we are speaking different languages. And our belief is like a different language. But if we pray to God, if there is a God again, I would like to believe there is, but with my past, I would be a hypocrite if I would say yes. I think that they should be thinking and listening to what happened in the past and trying to be better people, trying to make the mistakes that the grown-ups are doing, they shouldn't do it. And to find and to understand that life is for everybody. It is not just sort of a just for me and just for you. It is for everybody. And we should learn how to live together and to understand that life is for living and we are all equal. Nobody is better and nobody is worse. And that would be my message to the other people, and say how lucky we are. And we should make all of you the best for what time we are here.
Thank you. That's a very powerful message. And it's all the more powerful because it comes from somebody who's actually lived through terrible experiences in her youth, managed to build up her life after the war, and is now able, or was now able, to tell us that story. And if I can refer to one of the comments, you're a wonderful storyteller. Somebody wrote in the comments. So I just want to pass that on to you from the audience and give you a sort of virtual clap. I think if we were to be
thank you very much. Thank you so much. Listen, Stefan, thank you for inviting me, and Dominika and everybody. Because for me, each time that there are some people who listen, that they would sort of, because to me, religion doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. No matter whether somebody is Jewish or not Jewish. Many Jewish people don't even think that I am Jewish, because my favorite roast pork and crackling is my favorite. And I don't go to a synagogue. I am very Jewish. My race is Jewish. And I like to learn more about it. But I would like to be remembered as a human being, as a person.
You certainly will be remembered by everyone in the room. I think, just looking through the comments, you've made a huge impression on everyone. And it's been a real privilege, Dorit, to have you around. Thank you so much. Again, a virtual clap from everyone.
Thank you very much.
And thanks everyone in the audience for all the questions from different countries and continents, and some colleagues and students. So it's been real eye-opening, very emotional. There was one comment it was very emotional. And on that note, I think we can conclude the session. Thanks again, Dorit. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. And I hope we stay in touch. And yes, I would like to visit Paderborn as well.
Yes, colleagues from Paderborn and students, Dorit would like a little trip to Paderborn. I think
Shalom is the best word, which means peace.
Shalom, exactly.
Shalom.
Good, thank you.